She's an award-winning journalist. She's a teacher, speaker on the Christian apologetics, specializing in bioethics. Works for Life Training Institution since 2009, so 10 years for doing that. And an MA, a master's degree in Christian apologetics from Biola University. And we welcome Megan. Come, let's give her a hand there at James Pointer this morning. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It is truly a privilege to be here. Is the key word in terms of gymnastics. That was a long time ago now. I don't actually do it anymore unless we're talking about handstands with my kids in the living room. No, what a privilege it is to be among you. And it was kind of an interesting thing as I was preparing to travel to New Zealand just over a week ago, which is hard to believe. I'm on my last day of this trip. It's been an incredible journey. But before I came, I got an email from Rodney. And I have been kind of paying attention to the goings-on in New Zealand because I was trying to prepare to come and serve the groups that I would be speaking to here. And, of course, the email was about the abortion legislation that had just gone through its first reading and had passed on its first reading just 3 days before I was about to leave. And you have to know that this trip was scheduled 9 months ago. Yeah. And so I was brought to my knees before the Lord, really going, wow, this is... God, this is of you. This is not of me. It's never been about any of us individually anyway. It's all about him. And so what a humbling thing it has been to come and to talk about this topic at this time. I was reminded of the words of one of my favorite writers. Her name is Annie Dillard. And Annie Dillard, when she talks about church, she was kind of doing an exploration and comparing church and the seeking after God in our lives to some of the explorers of old who would go after trying to seek the southmost pole of the world. You know, there's kind of this mysterious location and looking after it. And she said she started observing what was going on in the churches. And she realized that sometimes we kind of forget what's really happening here. She was looking around and she said, what's going on in the minds of the churches? To quote one of my favorite philosophers, Peter Kraft, he said, don't we realize that we are spies who are plotting a revolution against the prince of this world? And on Sunday mornings when we come together, we meet in secret. And the Lion of the tribe of Judah comes to meet with us here as we plan. What a wonderful thing. So Annie Dillard said, when we come to church, it's almost like we're children playing in the floor with a chemistry set, just kind of mixing up a batch of TNT to kill a Sunday morning. Like we're doing serious stuff. She said it was kind of ridiculous to think about women who would come to church in straw hats and velvet hats, which I'm from the South in the States, and that's a thing there. People wear large hats to church, especially on special occasions. She said that's just ridiculous. They should be wearing crash helmets. And the ushers should really just lash us to our pews and hand out life preservers. Because the sleeping God may wake someday and draw us out to where we can never return. That's what we're doing here. And what a privilege to come in the midst of a series on hope. I think it's important to understand that there is a big difference between optimism and hope. Optimism, just that kind of positive thinking, that thing, and we can conjure it up like, no, let's look on the bright side of things. Men and women, sometimes, as you well know, probably, when you take a look around, things can seem dark in the world around us. The enemy is very cunning, and he can try and beat us down to the point where optimism seems useless. Hope is not like that. No. Hope is so firmly grounded within us because it comes from a source that reaches no end of the resources that God has for us. He is infinite after all, in all of his depths. And when our wells are dry, his well is eternally full and he fills us up. Hope comes from that place, and hope finds a way. It doesn't give up. It says there is a way. Christians are those types of people. Men and women of faith, when you look at the world and you look at the darkness around it, you are able to look with eyes wide open because of the God that we serve. Awesome. He's so big. And so we don't close our eyes to it. We walk into it. And we can do that. And I think perspective, which is today's kind of thought and theme as far as we're going into looking at the issue of abortion, perspective is key. If we could bring up the verse for today. This comes from 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 17. And actually, verse 16 begins, we don't give up hope. We take heart, is what Paul is saying. But then he says, for this light momentary affliction is preparing for us an eternal weight of glory beyond all comparison. As we look not to the things that are seen, but to the things that are unseen. For the things that are seen are transient, but the things that are unseen are eternal. Yeah. That infinite well that grounds us, so we are not shaken. I have a prism that hangs in my kitchen window. It's just a little piece of crystal. I think I bought it at a tourist shop in Florida a few years ago. And my kids love it, but the thing about that prism that's so interesting is that it reminds me about perspective. Because it hangs there, and it's pretty to look at, and I can hold it in my hand, and I can examine it, just as we would anything that we might be thinking about or talking about in the world around us. But I have found with that prism, because of all of the many facets that it has on it, that just one slight twist, and the sunlight catches it, and there are rainbows on the walls all around me. One shift in perspective, and the light explodes in the room around us. At a time like this, when abortion is at the forefront of New Zealand's discourse, at the forefront of the conversation of our minds and our hearts, when the ideas are so convoluted out there, it can seem hopeless. It can seem like, what is it that we're going to do? What can we do? What can we say? What power do we have? And so my goal today and the message that I've brought is to turn that prism just ever so slightly, give you a way to make a case for life. My primary goal in that is to give you a foundation on which to stand, hopefully, when it comes to this issue, but also to equip you with some things that you can say. So it is a useful type of apologetics message. But ultimately, at the end of this message, I hope that you will all be inspired. Because just that little shift in perspective, in looking at this issue through the lens of the gospel, teaches us something about ourselves and about the people around us that is so vitally important in the way that we talk about the issue of abortion. It's also vitally important as to why this issue must be talked about, and to why at a time like this, we must be the ones who stand in the gap like sentinels and say, not on our watch. So, I want to talk about the case for life. Now, the battle that we face as Christians, we're familiar with. This is not a battle that we see all the time, but we are being fired upon from every direction when it comes to ideas. But here's the thing about ideas. Ideas, as the great philosopher, we'll call him Leonardo DiCaprio. That was a joke. I'm so glad you laughed. Great actor, maybe not the greatest philosopher. I've never really had a deep philosophical conversation with Leo, but in the film Inception, which I still don't understand, in fact, I don't even recommend it, there is one line in that movie that they got exactly right. His character said, an idea can be the most dangerous thing. That's true, men and women. Because ideas have real-world consequences. And as my friend John Stonestreet would say, dangerous ideas have victims. Ideas have real-world consequences. Dangerous ideas have victims. Paul understood this. A little later in 2 Corinthians, when he is defending his own ministry, he says, we walk in the flesh, but we don't wage war according to the flesh. We don't have gladiator swords at our disposal or guns or things like that. That's not how we fight as Christians first and foremost. For the weapons of our warfare are not of the flesh, but have divine power to destroy strongholds. Now, when he uses that word strongholds, I do think he's talking about things like what I would call a worldview. The ways that certain people understand the world, perhaps the lies that they have adopted and believe that are informing their understanding of the world around them. If you don't believe me, go on. We destroy arguments, ideas, and every lofty opinion raised against the knowledge of God, ideas, and we are to take every thought captive to obey Christ, ideas. This unseen battle that we face. In the battle of ideas around abortion, the culture is really struggling to answer a couple of very important questions. That's really what we're going to talk about today. One of the questions deals with the nature of truth itself. Our culture, mine and yours, is struggling with the question, is truth really true? That sounds like I'm playing a word game, but I'm not. Abortion is a moral issue, so I could ask it this way: is moral truth something real that we can know, or is it something that we create and decide for ourselves? People are answering that question, and the way they're answering it is playing itself out in the world around us. The second question the culture is struggling to answer, the States has gone very far in the struggle, you guys are in it too, is the question, why are human beings valuable? What is it that gives you value? Or you could frame it this way: what is it that gives you rights that other people are obligated to respect? What is that thing that gives that to you? And Christians, this is an important question. Because how in the world do we share a gospel message with a world that has forgotten what it means to be human and valuable? So when people ask me, what does abortion have to do with the gospel? Everything. Well said. Everything. So, in an environment like this, in a world like this, how do we achieve any clarity on this issue and beginning to understand how we might answer those questions? Well, to make our case for life, the first thing we have to understand is that morality is not the same thing as preferences.
That's true.
Moral truths are real and knowable. After all, when we make a moral claim like abortion is wrong because it intentionally kills innocent human beings, and that's the claim that I'll defend today. I have some work to do that. But when we make that claim, I'm not talking about myself, and I'm not talking about my preferences. My claim is about the nature of reality. The same is true when we make claims about our faith. They're not matters of preference. Jesus either did rise from the dead or he didn't on that day in history. That's not my preference. It either did happen or it didn't. Paul staked everything on the resurrection. And thankfully, the arguments for that are solid. Wonderful. Morality is real and knowable, but when it comes to abortion, people tend to confuse our moral claims about it with preference claims, especially with this issue. In the States, there's a famous statement that says, oh, you don't like abortion, don't have one. There's a word in that statement that I have an issue with. Can you guess which word? Yeah, the word like, because it takes a moral claim and tries to twist it into a preference claim, and it's not that kind of claim. What if that sticker, as Francis Beckwith suggests, said, oh, you don't like slavery, don't own one? That's a moral issue too, but we're a little bit clearer on that one. We're not there on abortion yet, so how do we get there? 3 things. I think we need to start by simplifying the issue when it comes to talking about abortion. Now, let me just take a moment here and say a couple of things. Number 1, I am very aware that abortion is not a simple issue when it comes to many things. There are many things that bump into it that are very complex. It is complex emotionally. It is complex psychologically. It's complex economically. It can be complex politically. It could be complex socioeconomically. All of these different ways that bump into it. But morally, this issue is very, very simple. In fact, the whole debate hinges on a single question. And when I say simplify the issue, what I'm talking about is we have to learn to bring the conversation back to that question so that we can have a real conversation about it. Then you have to answer the question, because we can't pose a question without answering it. And finally, what I want to do in the time that I have left with you is to make a case as to why you matter, why we all have value that is unspeakable. I am going to ask for a tremendous amount of grace from you as I go into making this case for life. I see some familiar faces, which was a wonderful thing. I've only been in the country for 10 days. But for many of you, I've never met you, and I don't know what your story is. When we do something like this apologetics exercise, this giving reasons for the truth claims of something, that's what apologetics is. It's not saying I'm sorry for anything. But when we do that as an exercise, it does take these issues up into the abstract, into the world of ideas where we can logically look at them and see, do the ideas fit? Do they make sense? And when we do that, sometimes it can seem that we've forgotten the most important thing about apologetics, and that is that it is always attached to people. And when it comes to an issue like abortion, no matter where you may stand on the spectrum in your beliefs about it, from pro-choice to pro-life, The common denominator is that this issue hurts people. That's true across the board. And so as I do this exercise of looking at the ideas and assessing them, I'm going to ask you for that grace, because I cannot condemn anyone. The gospel tells me otherwise. So as we move into this, we're going to look at how we simplify the issue. I want you to meet my daughter. This is Neely. She is 13 years old, and she is every bit as wonderful as she looks in that photograph. I have a story to tell you about Neely very quickly. A couple years ago, we were at my home in Georgia, and I lived in Georgia at the time. My husband took a job in Colorado, so we've been living there for the last year, but I was born and raised in the state of Georgia. We lived in a log cabin in the woods, and I have a good friend named Courtney. Now, I have Neely and one son, Rogan. That's my two children. Courtney, at the time, had 3 boys. She now has a little girl as well, but Rosalie was not with us at the time. She wasn't in the picture yet. But Courtney's oldest boy, Micah, and Neely are best friends. They just play wonderfully together. So when Courtney came over to visit with me, the kids went out into the backyard, and it was a beautiful day. So we opened the back door so we could sit down and have coffee and visit, and then we could hear what was going on in the backyard, but I could not see them. That's important. You with me so far? I got one sip into what is objectively the most wonderful beverage on the face of the planet, right? I can get an amen for that. One sip in, when I hear the sound every parent dreads, blood-curdling screaming from the backyard. Now, it was distinctly female. Remember, Courtney has 3 boys. I knew it was my kid. So I did what any good parent would do. I dropped the coffee. And just a little spoiler alert, that is the most tragic part of this story. I got up, and as I'm heading for the back door, I'm hearing my daughter the whole time, and I hear her say, "Get it off me, just kill it." So in the span of eternity of 3 seconds, all you parents know what that feels like. As I'm lunging for the back door, I'm thinking to myself, kill what? You know that moment when you're like, what am I about to see? Is there an insect on my daughter trying to sting her? We have those in the States. They're everywhere, like bees and hornets and wasps. And if so, I'll help her kill it. I don't do bugs with stingers. Is it the next door neighbor's Jack Russell Terrier? Because I'll tell you one thing about Ace. He was very, very cute, and that is all. Yeah, he was bit legs and ankles and everything else. But no, we're not going to kill Ace. We're going to put Ace back in Steve's yard and then question as to how he got out to begin with. Is it her brother? Now, before you laugh completely at that one, you have to understand my son. Oop. This is Rogan. He made that costume. And he can't decide from one day to the next whether or not he actually is Wolverine or just like a normal ninja. And I have to know because I do the laundry in the house. So I got to know which one to have ready. So not entirely out of the question. The point is that the answer to what is it matters. For the record, it was a lizard. Micah caught the lizard. He handed it to Neely. It slithered out of her hand and up her shirt sleeve. So no animals were actually harmed in the making of it. It was flung several feet across the backyard and survived the whole ordeal. But the answer to what is it matters. Can we kill the unborn? I'm going to go out on a limb and say, sure. If the unborn are not human beings. If it is true, as many claim, that having an abortion is no different than clipping a fingernail or pulling a tooth, if it is simply a medical procedure like that, then I shouldn't have a problem with it. But if the unborn are human, like you and I are human, that's different. So before we can talk about whether or not we can kill the unborn, we must answer the question, what is the unborn? That's the question at the center of the debate. And there are many, many reasons people give for why abortion should be okay. But they all skip this question. I can give you several. Privacy is the legal justification in the states under the federal law as to why abortion should be allowed. It's a private matter between a woman and her doctor, between a woman and her God. I have no say as to what goes on in the privacy of someone else's bedroom. Poverty. This woman can't afford to feed another child. I hear that abortion enables women to pursue their education and their careers and their dreams without an unplanned pregnancy standing in the way. None of these deal with trivial matters, you guys. Every single one of these is an important issue. Abortion prevents unwanted children from being born. Abortion prevents disabled children from being born who may suffer. If we were to make laws against abortion, wouldn't that be imposing religion on other people? If we were to make laws against abortion, would women be forced to try and obtain illegal abortions where they might be harmed in trying to obtain them? Again, there is nothing, unfortunately, nothing easy that we will talk about today. Every single one of those matters, but every single one of those skips this question. If I were to bring my nephew AJ out onto the stage for you to see today, he's not with me, but I wish he was, because he might be, next to my children, the cutest baby I've ever seen. My brother is blonde-haired and blue-eyed, and he married basically a Mayan princess. She's from Mexico. Her name is Mayola, and she is stunningly beautiful, and they made this baby. If I were to bring AJ out onto the stage for you, would immediately agree on two things. He's about this big. He would not be standing still. We could all agree that he is a little bit crazy, as most toddlers are. He'd probably be upside down, right? But we would all agree that he is unquestionably human. And what I want you to do as an exercise is consider every single one of those justifications that I listed a moment ago and ask yourself, what if we were talking about AJ instead of the unborn? See, we know that AJ is human, but we don't kill toddlers in the name of privacy. And we don't kill toddlers when they get expensive. When I speak to teenage audiences, I tell them, we don't kill teenagers when they get expensive either. This is really good news for them. They're always shocked to hear that. We don't kill toddlers when they stand in the way of something that we want, like our dreams. We don't kill toddlers when they are unwanted. There are orphanages around the world full of seemingly unwanted children. I think that's arguable because I know of too many families waiting to adopt. We don't kill toddlers when they're disabled. It's no more religious to say that AJ has value and cannot be killed than to say that he doesn't have value and can. And we have no problem with laws that make it more difficult to harm toddlers. Let me just be clear on that last objection that I made about women seeking illegal abortions who may be harmed. Anyone harmed because of abortion is a travesty. Anyone. But when people make that assertion, they're not thinking of the unborn human beings who are being killed in the seeking of those illegal abortions. We have to get back to the question, what is the unborn? Because it brings clarity to the issue. It doesn't belittle the importance of those other things, but it helps us focus on what we must focus on first so that then we can better think about all of those other things in light of what we cannot do. There's a better answer. So we teach Trot Out the Toddler at Life Training Institute. Essentially, it is what I just told you to do. When someone brings a justification for abortion to the table, ask yourself, would it be all right if we were talking about a toddler? If the answer is no, then you know that person is assuming that the unborn is not human. And you can actually hold your hand out like I did talking about AJ and use a toddler as an example in conversation just to help bring clarity to the conversation. Now, in doing this, you have not made a case for the pro-life view. All you have done is frame a conversation. But as my boss would often say, he who frames the debate wins the debate. This is trying to achieve clarity so that you can have a real conversation. Now, it's not fair to pose a question without then answering the question. And so we have to then go about answering that question. I'm going to need the next slide, and I think this is angry with me, so I'm going to ask for help from the back. When it comes to the question, what is the unborn, we have to realize that this is not a religious question. Oftentimes you might be accused, at this point of making your case, well, you must be a religious person. That happens to me all the time. That's your truth. And I say, actually, you know what? I did ask a question, and I am unapologetically a Christian. I believe Christianity is true. We can talk about that if you'd like, but this wasn't a religious question that I posed. It is a scientific question. There's a whole field of science dedicated to the answering of this question called embryology, which just means the study of embryos, but it has already provided the answer for us. When it comes to what is the unborn, embryology says from the very beginning that the unborn is a living, distinct, whole human being. That's incredible. We know that the unborn is alive. It fits the definition of an organism. It grows, meaning it undergoes cellular reproduction. Dead things don't do that. It metabolizes by turning food into energy, responds to stimuli. Embryos have even been shown to be excellent at wound repair. It's pretty impressive. We know that they're alive. They are organisms. We know that they're distinct. That means they're not part of the woman's body like my arm might be a part of my body. They are attached to their mothers, yes, but they have their own unique genetic code that is different from their mothers and their fathers. They are a distinct entity. And science can go even deeper into that for those who are interested as to why that is the case. And they are also whole human beings. That is to say, yes, even at that single-celled stage, you were a whole human being. Here's why. There is a difference between what we would call parts and wholes. If you guys would just, 1 second, hold up one hand for me. Very good. Turn that hand around very gently. Scratch the back of that hand. Don't hurt yourself. And then you can kind of rub it or whatever, brush it off. Okay, that was weird. You clearly trust me. That was a test. No. We all successfully just scratched several hundred of our own skin cells from the backs of our hands. Now, that is your outer layer, so some of those cells were dead, but many of them are still alive on your lap right now. And this is kind of gross, right? All of them contain your DNA encoding. No one is guilty of mass murder. Thank goodness. Those cells are part of you. Their job is to contribute to the overall function of the organism that is you. Now, an embryo is different in kind from any other cell in your body. It is a whole entity in and of itself. It's different from a sperm and an egg cell even, both of which are certainly alive, but they are part of another organism with a particular function. But the embryo, even at that single-celled stage, its parts contribute to its overall function, and it goes on to do something that is absolutely remarkable. I want to make another distinction for you between something I would call substance things and something I would call property things. This world would love for you to think of the embryo and yourself as a property thing. Property things are things that are nothing more than a sum of their parts, like this table. This is a property thing. It was put together piece by piece, so it came into existence over a period of time. It is nothing more than a sum of its pieces, and if I were to take it apart, it would no longer be a table, it would be a pile of plastic and metal. That's all. The world would love for you to think of yourself as no more than a sum of your parts, as nothing more than just your body, but we know there's more to you than your body. Very simple illustration. If you were, God forbid, hypothetically, to lose a limb in an accident, your loved ones would not be coming to the hospital to visit 3/4 of you. They would be coming to visit you because you are more than just your body. You are a substance kind of thing. Substance things didn't come into being over time. They came into being all at once. And they didn't become more of their kind. They mature according to their kind. And there is something about substance things that grounds their identity through time and through change. You are a substance kind of thing, and you were a substance kind of thing when you came into existence as an embryo. That's the cool thing about this. You didn't come from an embryo, you once were one. And everything that makes you you was already there. That's the kind of thing you are. One more distinction, the difference between construction and development. The embryo is not a constructed thing. Again, not a properties kind of thing. But people think that way because we do live in a very industrial society where we build a lot of things. That's why you hear language like, oh, it's just a clump of cells, or it's just a mass of tissue, as if you could add more pieces and then the end product would be a baby. Think of how we've changed the terms over the years. My grandmother, when she talked about baby making, talked about the word procreation. It's a good biblical word that's still very relevant. The Bible has a tendency not to lose meaning through time and change. My generation exclusively uses the word reproduction. Yeah. Ideas have consequences and dangerous ideas have victims. But an embryo does something that no constructed thing could ever do. From the time you were an embryo, you drove your own development from within. You weren't constructed at all. You developed yourself from within. Philosopher Richard Stith teaches us about this with a simple illustration. I'm going to show you a photograph of an artifact called a camera. This is not attached to a phone. Young people in the room, we used these. I'm kidding. All right, so these are coming back into style, actually. Raise your hand if you know what this camera is. A Polaroid camera, spits out the tab. Cool, okay. That's important. He says, you are holding one of these cameras in the Amazon, taking photographs of the scenery in front of you, which is stunningly beautiful. And you go to snap a picture, and as soon as you snap that photo, when you hit that button, this guy leaps out across the path. And you know you've got it. So you're holding this image. Now, let me tell you something about black jaguars. I'm basically an expert because I watched the show Wild Kratts with my kids. No. They are very, very rare. And so there are not many photos of them in the wild because of how rare they are. They're very beautiful, obviously. So this photo that you have would be something of extreme value. I want you to imagine you're a few seconds into the process and you're waiting patiently. Maybe you're one of those people that shakes it. You know, like the people who hit the elevator button. Like it's going to come faster. You know what I'm saying? But you're waiting and you're waiting. You're about a few seconds in. Someone comes and looks over your shoulder and they say, huh. And they take that tab from your hands and they rip it in two. And they toss it aside. Now, you would be furious with them. But imagine they said, what's the big deal? It was just a brown smudge. You'd say, no, it wasn't. I was holding a photograph of a jaguar. It was rare. It was beautiful. It was valuable. It was already there. You just couldn't see it yet because it was doing what? Developing. Just like we all did, and just like the embryo does. That is what science has to say to us. And there are times when you'll be making your case and you'll get through the science the best that you can. And you'll meet someone who says, well, I know what science says. Of course it's human, but it's not a person. It's not a person yet. It's a different kind of debate, which sounds a little crazy, right? As if there are some humans who are merely human. But there are some humans who are valuable persons. The underlying idea being some humans matter more than other humans. This is when we come back to that question, why are human beings valuable? What is it that determines human value? This is no longer a scientific question, it is a philosophical question. So we'll go to philosophy to answer it. And philosophy gives lots of different types of answers, but they only fall into two important categories. It may be that you are valuable like an instrument. So we have something called instrumental value. You guys who play instruments know that instruments serve a particular purpose. They perform in a certain way. So instrumental answers to this question are going to deal with traits or attributes or abilities or functions that you have. The other type of answer philosophy gives is that you might be intrinsically valuable. This one is so simple, most people just dismiss it. This one means you're valuable in light of the kind of thing you are, because you're human. And that's all. Stephen Schwartz is a philosopher who takes this view. He says you matter just because you're human. In fact, there aren't that many differences that you can point out between an embryonic human, that we all once were, and the adults sitting in the room today. Not differences that would make it okay to have killed us back then, but not now. So he says there are only 4 categories of difference between embryos and us. None of them are good enough. They're not morally relevant, in other words. They're all instrumental, so I have to talk about them over here. They are size, level of development, environment, and degree of dependency. The only differences you can point out between embryos and us, embryos are tiny, yes they are. No bigger than a dot at the end of a sentence. But since when does your size as a human have any bearing on your value as a human? If that is the value-giving thing, we could play a game called Let's All Stand Up. And we'll see how that plays out. I guarantee I will lose if I take off my 2.5-inch heels. Ladies' women's rights is out the window because generally speaking, women are smaller than men. None of our children would stand a chance. That's just the thing when you start picking traits like this. These things come in degrees. And if size is the value-giving trait, that means that smaller human beings have less of a right to life than larger human beings. Level of development, similarly, the unborn are less developed, therefore less valuable. That's how the reasoning would go. My son is 7 years old. He is less developed than every man in this room, but I can't kill Rogan because he's less developed than we are. That's a crazy idea. But if we're going to grant that for the unborn, based on the fact that these humans are less developed, we have to be consistent. Logic is tricky that way, and it demands consistency. And what we find is that less developed humans will therefore have less value than more developed ones. These arguments come in all kinds of varieties. Some would talk about things like consciousness. Dr. Peter Singer, a famous bioethicist, talks about sentience as the value-giving trait. Sentience comes and goes in varying degrees. But our rights do not. Environment, that's where you're located. The unborn are inside, we're outside. That's a difference of less than 25 centimeters. I had to do that conversion in my head just then because I would have said 10 inches. You're welcome. Yeah. But 25 centimeters, that's not a very large span of space. If it's 25 centimeters that brings us into valuable humanity, the same reasoning can undo that and say that it can take you out. Be careful if you move to the next chair. And degree of dependency, the unborn are dependent on their mothers for survival, that's true. But my mother is diabetic, and she is dependent upon the medicine that she takes to help her body process sugar in ways that it cannot. And without that medicine, my mom, Debbie, will not live very long. I can't kill my mother because of her dependency. But if we're going to grant it for unborn humans, then we have to be consistent. And what we find is that these answers, instrumental answers, create value spectrums on which some human beings matter more than others. These answers give us no hope for human equality. The only answer that makes sense philosophically is that you are intrinsically valuable. That means you matter just because you're human. And men and women, that fits squarely within the Christian worldview. Page 1 of the scripture. God created you in his image. God has endowed us with a value beyond measure. You cannot give it away, and nobody can take it from you. Not ultimately. They can try, but they can't have it. Men and women, the only thing that keeps me talking about this issue, the only thing, is that I only can see it through the light of the gospel. And that gospel tells me what Jesus did on our behalf, that apart from him, we stand on a level playing field before God the Father. None of us has hope apart from Christ. It tells me that we all need the same thing, according to the work that he did on the cross. See, Jesus voluntarily laid down his life. No one took it from him. He gave himself over to take on himself all that was due us. And then he walked out of the grave. Again, the arguments that support that are wonderful. You can count on them, you can use them, and they're across the board: science, philosophy, medicine, history. That the resurrection really happened. And when he did that, he made a mockery out of things like sin and death. He killed them. He is victorious. That tells me that in a culture, and mine is very much like this, and I would imagine New Zealand is very much the same, I've encountered it since I've been here, that a subject like abortion, the word itself should not be spoken out loud, but should be kept hidden away. The gospel tells me that we bring dark things into light so that they can be exposed for what they are. If there are any in the room today who have experienced abortion or it has touched you, whether directly or indirectly, and that could be a woman or a man, please hear me when I say that that gospel offers forgiveness and grace beyond measure. Remember, God's wells are infinite, and it is free and available. But the other thing that you should hear me say is that there's not really a difference between you and the others, between me and any of you, because apart from Christ, we all stand level. We all need the same thing. That's incredibly humbling and incredibly freeing. If you can be the types of men and women who adopt that idea and understand, not only are you intrinsically valuable as a human being, we are cracked prisms, but when God turns us ever so slightly and shines his light through us, we radiate. Wow. When that happens, you guys, you have a message of hope to the world like no other. And if you can understand who you are and walk in that identity, then the world can't really touch you. You will be the types of men and women that it can't define. And when the pressure is on not to talk about abortion, that won't stick to you because you are anchored in something greater. My prayer for you is that you would have that courage and you would walk in it, that you would use the tools that you were given today. God bless you. Thank you so much for your time.